void of hesitation. Nia did not pull away. She forced her breathing to remain shallow and rhythmic, refusing to give the other woman the satisfaction of a tremor. "If you kill me now, the offshore accounts will be frozen before you reach the border," Nia said, her voice cutting through the wind. "David has the power of attorney papers locked in his library. I am the only one who can sign them. I will give you the entire empire. I want out of this lie as much as you do." The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating, as the life or death decision hung in the damp air between them. The transition from the pier to the library was a blur of silence and heavy, suffocating air. They moved through the foyer, the mansion's vast, empty halls echoing with the sound of their footsteps. David walked with his head bowed, his presence diminished, while Katherine stayed close, the weapon never leaving her grip. They entered the library, where the scent of old paper and dust hung thick. David sat in his chair, his hands resting limply on the mahogany surface. Nia stepped toward the desk, her movements deliberate and steady. She reached out, her fingers brushing the cold, polished metal of the gold pen. The weight of it was significant, a tool of immense power now repurposed for survival. She pulled the documents toward her, the paper crisp and heavy under her touch. Katherine stood inches away, her gaze fixed on the ink as it touched the page. Nia's hand did not shake. She traced the lines, her signature flowing across the bottom of the legal forms, with a finality that seemed to pull the breath from the room. She set the pen down, the sharp click of metal against wood signaling the end of the transaction. "It is done," she whispered, the words hanging in the stagnant air like a sentence. Katherine did not move to take the papers. Instead, she stepped closer, the pistol rising until the muzzle rested against Nia's forehead. The cold steel bit into her skin, a sharp contrast to the stifling heat of the room. Katherine's lips curled into a thin, humorless line. "You were a lovely shadow, Nia," she said, her voice dropping to a low, mocking register. "But the sun is coming up, and shadows have no place in the light." Nia felt the hammer of the weapon click back, a sound that seemed to vibrate through her entire skull. She watched Katherine's eyes, searching for a flicker of hesitation, but found only a hollow, crystalline resolve. The room felt smaller, the walls closing in as the air grew thin. Katherine's finger tightened on the trigger, her posture shifting to absorb the recoil. "I would not be so sure," Nia replied, her voice steady and devoid of fear. She kept her eyes locked on Katherine's, refusing to blink. The silence in the library became absolute, a vacuum waiting to be filled by the sound of a gunshot. Katherine leaned in, her gaze hardening into a final, lethal intent. The heavy library doors did not just open, they disintegrated under the force of a tactical ram. Splinters of oak showered the room as a dozen figures in black tactical gear poured through the threshold, their weapons leveled with surgical precision. The sudden roar of movement shattered the suffocating silence. Katherine spun, her pistol swinging toward the nearest intruder, but a flash bang detonated in the foyer, blinding the room in a strobe of white light. Nia dropped to the floor, hands over her head. As the agents swarmed the desk, she reached out, her fingers finding the gold pen she had set down moments before. She held it up, the small red light on the cap pulsing with a steady, rhythmic beat. The lead officer skidded to a halt beside her. Nia pressed the pen into his palm. "It is all here," she said, her voice cutting through the chaos. The fraud, the conspiracy, the confession. The agents surged forward, pinning Katherine against the mahogany desk and forcing Marek to the ground. The air now tasted of ozone and finality. Marek roared, a guttural sound of pure rage as he lunged at the nearest agent. He was met with a swift strike to the ribs that sent him sprawling, the air leaving his lungs in a sharp wheeze. 2 agents pinned him to the floor, their knees driving into his back as they secured his wrists with heavy plastic ties. Beside him, Katherine fought with a frantic, clawing intensity. She screamed, a high, piercing sound that echoed off the library's vaulted ceiling, her nails raking against the hands of the officers trying to restrain her. Her defiance was absolute until the metal cuffs clicked shut, silencing her protest. The agents hauled them to their feet, dragging them toward the foyer. Their boots scraped against the polished floor, a harsh, grating rhythm that underscored the end of their reign. Katherine's voice trailed off into a series of jagged, breathless gasps as she was pulled through the doorway and into the night. Marek followed, his head bowed, the fight drained from his body. Silence rushed back into the room, heavy and suffocating. David remained in his chair, his gaze fixed on the empty space where his wife had stood only moments before. The heavy silence of the library was broken only by the distant slam of vehicle doors and the fading hum of sirens. David did not look up. He stared at the mahogany surface of his desk, his fingers tracing the grain as if searching for a hidden exit. The room felt cavernous now, stripped of the tension that had defined it for weeks. He shifted, the leather of his chair creaking in the stillness, and finally turned his head toward Nia. His eyes were bloodshot, the sharp, predatory focus replaced by a dull, hollow ache. He looked at her not as a partner, but as a stranger who had witnessed his undoing. "Was any of it real?" he asked, his voice barely rising above the sound of the wind rattling the window panes. "The 30 days, the nights in this house, the way you looked at me when the world was quiet." He paused, his breath hitching in his chest. "Was there ever a person beneath the performance, or did you just play the role until you forgot who you were?" He waited, his posture slumped, his entire empire reduced to the space between them. Nia stood still, her gaze steady. Nia did not flinch. She watched him, her expression unreadable, as the weight of his question hung in the stagnant air. She reached into her pocket, her fingers brushing against the heavy textured paper of the card he had forced upon her weeks ago. She pulled it out, the gold embossed edges catching the dim light of the library lamp. She stepped forward, the sound of her footsteps sharp and deliberate against the hardwood floor. She did not offer him comfort or a confession. Instead, she placed the card on the mahogany desk, sliding it across the polished surface until it came to rest directly in front of his trembling hands. "You wanted a performance," she said, her voice steady. "You wanted a mirror, a monument, a shadow to fill the space where a person used to be. I gave you exactly what you paid for. I played the role to the letter, but the contract is finished. You did not want a partner, David. You wanted a product, and I am not for sale." She turned away from him, her movements fluid and final. She walked toward the heavy library doors, leaving him alone with the silence of his empty empire. Nia crossed the foyer, her footsteps echoing against the marble floor. The grand hall felt different now, stripped of its intimidating scale. She moved past the silent statues and the towering empty archways that had once seemed designed to trap her. She reached the main entrance where the massive double doors stood slightly ajar. She gripped the cold metal handles and pushed. The heavy wood groaned, swinging outward to reveal the world beyond. She stepped over the threshold and onto the stone porch. The air hit her instantly, cool, crisp, and clean. It lacked the scent of sandalwood and old secrets that had permeated every room inside. She stood still, looking up at the sky. The clouds were breaking, revealing thin, pale streaks of dawn light. The deluge that had defined her life in this city for weeks had finally ceased. There was no sound of water hitting the pavement, no rhythmic drip from the eaves, and no oppressive humidity clinging to her skin. The silence of the morning was not the heavy, manufactured quiet of the library, but a natural, breathing stillness. She took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the sharp, damp air of a new day. She was outside the walls, and the world felt vast. Nia walked toward the idling government car parked at the edge of the driveway. The gravel crunched beneath her feet, a grounding sound that signaled the end of her performance. She opened the passenger door and slid into the seat. The interior smelled of sterile plastic and cold metal, a sharp contrast to the suffocating luxury she had just escaped. She reached up and adjusted the rearview mirror, tilting it until it caught her face in the pale morning light. She braced herself to see the ghost of the woman she had been forced to mimic, or perhaps the hollowed-out shell of a victim who had survived a war of shadows. Instead, the glass showed only her. She leaned closer, her eyes scanning the familiar features. There was no trace of the twin who had tried to steal her life, and no sign of the desperate woman who had once walked the streets of District 4 Inches the Rain. She saw the lines of her own jaw, the steady focus in her gaze, and the quiet strength of a person who had navigated a labyrinth of deception and walked out the other side. She was not a monument to someone else's control, nor a pawn in a game of offshore accounts and violence. She was simply Nia. She reached out, gripped the edge of the mirror, and pushed it back into place. She looked ahead at the horizon, where the sun was finally cresting over the city skyline. She was more than enough, and she was finally free.